This is Jen, the Liberty Lion, and today I'm going to be talking about the Constitution, specifically the 14th Amendment. And the reason for this is to help you understand in a video without having to go through and read the stuff I posted, I think it was yesterday, what the 14th Amendment is saying. Okay? So it says all persons born or naturalized in the United States. Okay, so if you've been watching my videos, you know that the United States is the military, okay? The United States of America are the states in their collective capacity. The states had to be each individually free, sovereign, and independent. And this is so that they could make contracts. You can't make contracts if you're not free and sovereign. So all persons born or naturalized in the United States. So you say, how are you born or naturalized if you're in the military? That might be your question. And the answer would be that when you're in the military, you join the military either as an enlisted person or an officer, which is someone who has a commission. You can also be a non-commissioned officer. And that's when an enlistment person, the lower ranks, rise up through the ranks and they achieve officer status by going through the ranks. Now, if you're a commissioned officer, it's because you qualify in some kind of way, either through education or experience. And then you receive a commission from the president. Those commissions, my understanding is, now, just to give you a little bit more information, I perceive the Constitution, and I talk about the Constitution in the way that the founders intended it to be, not through all the coups and usurpations and debates and Supreme Court cases where they've just changed it and changed it and changed it and expanded it and expanded it and expanded it. So I'm not talking about the modern Constitution, the misunderstanding of the Constitution. I'm talking about the way the founders intended it. So in the States, 556 for those of you who know, in the States, the governor would choose who he wants to be the officers to get a commission through the president, because we know that the president has to sign all the commissions. So what happened was the governor would choose someone and he would say, hey, I think you'd make a good officer, or someone would come to the governor and say, hey, I think I would make a good commissioned officer, and they would fill out a form and they would file it in the court of record at the district court. So the government has a right to move paperwork, mail paperwork through the system without having to pay for post stamps. So if you're applying to be a commissioned officer, you go down to the district court, you file your paperwork that the governor has signed, and they send that to the president, and the president looks it over and he decides if he wants you to be a commissioned officer or not. And if he does, he'll sign the paperwork. Commissioned officers were supposed to be picked by the states. There was a reason for that. The reason for that was that the states needed to pick the officers that they had in the military so that they knew that the officers would be loyal to the states and not just to the federal government and expansion of the federal government. Today, the states don't pick their commissioned officers anymore. The federal government does. They just bypass the state. The government picks their commissioned officers, and now we have this corrupt system that we have, and we have this corrupt system because they haven't followed the rules, or they try to change how we understand the rules so that the federal government can gain more power. The federal government being the United States, or the corrupted state of Texas or state of Virginia instead of the republics. So these military people, they were residents on federal land, which meant that they didn't own the federal land, but they lived there. They could use the land for certain purposes, but when they used it for gaining profit, they would have to pay a tax on that, and that's part of the reason why we have tax in the federal Constitution. These people, since they lived on the military post, back in those days, the women, their dependents, would have their babies on the post in their homes. So these babies would be born on federal lands. These babies born on federal lands would be born, okay? This happened a lot by the time Article 14 was passed, which is called Article here, we call it Amendment. By the time Amendment 14 was passed, there had already been a lot of babies, and so they needed to clarify that these children were born, that some people were born on federal lands, but not only are they a federal citizen, they're also a state citizen. But if you're not born on federal lands and you want to become an officer, or you wanted to join the military as an enlisted person, which meant that you had to sign a contract for a number of years, which meant you became now property of the United States, then you would be naturalized. So you would be born or naturalized in the United States, which means on the federal lands, because remember, the United States are the federal lands, and the federal lands are for the purpose of defense, which is our military. Okay, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So they're subject to the jurisdiction of the federal government, because the federal government makes laws, the military makes laws for all its military people on its federal lands. So not only are you born or naturalized, not both, just one or the other, you don't need to be both. You're born or naturalized in the United States on the federal lands, and therefore you're subject to the federal jurisdiction or the state wherein they reside. Okay, so most of you probably know by now that I worked for the federal government. I was a regulatory enforcement specialist. So I went around and I made sure all the regulations were followed, all the laws were followed, but not only did we make sure that the federal laws were followed, some of the state laws had to be followed on the federal lands also. The problem was that the state laws cannot interfere with military works. So the state laws cannot interfere with federal works, the federal stuff. So we have, let's say for example, there's a river and it runs through the federal lands. The federal government has to follow the environmental laws put out by the state, because the water runs through the federal lands into the state, and then other people have a right to that waterway, such as the state citizens who are not also federal citizens. Because you have state citizens who are state civilians, not military, and then you have military people and their dependents who are federal citizens, a citizen of the United States, and a citizen of the state that they're in. So the federal government has to follow some state laws on federal lands, but they have to follow all the federal laws on the federal lands, at least the ones that apply to them. So if you have ordnance on a military post, they have to follow the ordnance laws. If you don't have ordnance on this military post, there's no ordnance laws to follow. Okay, so the state shall make or enforce any law. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privilege or immunities of citizens of the military, the United States. So what does that mean? That means that the states cannot interfere with the privileges and immunities of the military. Okay, so no state can make a law that interferes with military works, with the privileges and immunities that the military has. So for example, let's say you have a military person on one post and he has to travel off the post through the state to get to the other post, and he's on duty. His privilege is the right to travel from one area to the next without being stopped by the state, okay, especially if he's on orders. You can't stop a military person on orders. Think of war, okay? Think of wartime. So let's say there's a war that's broken out, and one state is saying we don't want to be involved in the war, and another state is saying we do. So some military people might have to flow through the state that doesn't want to be involved. They might want to stop those military people from getting from one point to the next. So no state shall interfere with the right to travel of the military person, especially when they're on orders. Okay, that's just an example. There's probably a number of other privileges and immunities. Okay, and I don't want to list them all because that would be like listing all of your rights. It's just too long. There's too many of them. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So if a man in the military, or a woman these days, but again we're talking about way back then, if a man in the military comes off a military post and commits a crime in the state, he cannot be deprived of his property, or he cannot be deprived of due process of law or his life without going through the motions of due process. He has to be guaranteed due process because, again, not only is he a federal citizen, he's a state citizen. So let's say a military person comes off a military post and he's going home on leave and he's got his bags with him and everything, and the state decides, oh, we don't like you, you're military, we're going to take your stuff. Okay, well, they can't do it because they agreed and they ratified the federal constitution, which meant that they agreed to these things. Okay, so nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Okay, so that's just saying that a federal person that comes off a military post has equal protection to a citizen that is not in the military or a civilian. Okay, so with that in mind, you can read section 2 and 3 and 4 and figure out, you know, how that would apply. And if you've never been in the military and you've never had anything to do with the military, this might be a little bit difficult for you to understand. I'm finding that out with civilians who've never served in the military. Somebody told me, well, the military lied to you, that's not what the Constitution says, blah, blah, blah. And what I say to them is the Constitution is strictly followed on federal lands. It's not strictly followed by the state reps that go to the federal seat of government, but it's strictly followed by everyone in the military. I can guarantee you that, at least when I was back in the 90s and 2000s, the Constitution is strictly followed on federal lands. Okay, not the pretend idea of what the Constitution is, but the actual meaning of the Constitution is followed on federal lands. It has to be followed on federal lands. Okay, so then somebody talked about Article 4. This is conversations that I've had with other people. Okay, and Article 4, Section 3. Okay, so new states may be admitted by the Congress into this union. Okay, we know that. But no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state. Okay, so this is where the confusion comes in. There are certain principles that have to be followed when you're making law or you're passing legal things like contracts or organic laws, the organic laws. So when the states ratified the federal Constitution, what they did was they allowed for military posts to be put on the land of the state. So you have Texas, which is a territory, and then you have the Republic of Texas, and then you have the federal state, which are the federal lands inside Texas. These federal lands are, you could say, a federal state, right? A military state. So if you have a federal constitution that you've ratified and you're saying you will not create, the federal government will not create another state, like you agree that we can put a state in Texas, but we won't put another state inside that state. So they agree first to the federal state, which is in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, those lands for military purposes and the seat of government. You're agreeing to put a new jurisdiction inside the state, okay? But you're also agreeing that that new jurisdiction won't create another jurisdiction. So you're agreeing to the military property. You're agreeing to the military lands. You're agreeing to the federal state inside Texas. But you're not agreeing to have another jurisdiction raised inside that jurisdiction or inside the Republic of Texas. So if you have the Republic of Texas and the federal government, they're separate. They're both inside Texas, but they're separate. It's not a jurisdiction inside another government. They're separate. And there's not another jurisdiction inside the federal jurisdiction inside the state. Okay, now that's a little confusing. It's kind of hard to get your mind wrapped around, but we know that, like for example, Texas ratified the federal Constitution. So it agreed to a jurisdiction, but they're separate jurisdictions inside Texas, Republic of Texas and the federal jurisdiction. So what they're saying is that you're not going to put them together. okay? And you're not going to put another jurisdiction inside the federal jurisdiction, a new one. So you can't have a military state inside Texas and then put a communist state inside the military state, or a socialist state inside the military state, because then that would expand and it would start taking over, right? So this was just a extra precaution showing that these two, the republic and the federal, were not going to overlap and become a jurisdiction within a jurisdiction. But if you are a republic citizen and you become a federal citizen, you're still a state citizen. But the jurisdiction's lined out. So you're either this or you're that. And that's why Section 4 is included under Article 4. Okay? So Section 4 says that the United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union, all the states, each state has a Republican form of government. That's not saying that the federal state is the Republican form. That's saying that the military, the federal, which is the federal state, which is the United States, is going to be used to protect the republics in each of the states. And this is why the states are supposed to select the military officers. It's another protection. It's another measure of protection to ensure that the military doesn't get out of hand and doesn't take over, which they have, because they've lied to us and they've told us, well, this means that the federal government is the republic. The military is a stratocracy, in my opinion. It's a military. The states are the governments, and the military is supposed to protect the states. And we see that when it says, and shall protect each of them against invasion. Okay, so the United States, the military, so let's reread this. The military shall guarantee to every state in the Union, every single state in this Union, a Republican form of government. So you go back to your Republic Constitution, not the state of Constitution, the Republic Constitution. And the military shall protect each of them against invasion. Doesn't that make sense? That the military would protect the republics of each of the states? And when the state applies to the legislature or the executive, which is the president, in case the legislature cannot be convened, against domestic violence, that's a protection. You're going to use the military to protect the state republics against domestic violence. Okay? It's simple. The stratocracy, the military, the United States, is to be used to protect each person in the state, each republic in the state against domestic problems. So if someone comes in and tries to take over the republic and alter our form of government, our guaranteed form of government in our state, the military should be used to reinstate it, to restore it. Okay? And the governor, when he sees a problem occurring, is supposed to call the president if there's such a big problem in the nation that the Congress can't be convened. He's supposed to call the president as the executive officer, not the commander-in-chief, but as the executive officer, because he's the first line of defense for the states. He's the commander-in-chief for the first line of defense for the military. They're supposed to call him and say, hey, you need to send orders out to the military. So then he goes from executive, hearing the governors, to now I'm going to talk to the military as commander-in-chief. And I'm going to send the military out to go restore the republic in this state. So that's why the president has two jobs as president. That's why he has two titles. He's the executive officer, so he'll take calls from the governors of any state, of a republic, and then he can give orders as the president, as the commander-in-chief of the military, to send them out to restore the republic. And we see that. It's written in here. I just read you Article 4, Section 4. Now let's look at Article 2, the president. executive of the United States of America is the governor's contact, because the governors in the states are not military, they're civilians. So they don't need to talk to the commander-in-chief. They need to talk to their officer, their hierarchy, their civilian hierarchy. So the president is civilian, but he's also military. He's like the only one. So, and I'll explain that in a minute too. And that's under the requirements in Article 2. So the governors call the president, who is the executive officer of the United States of America, the civilians, the United States of America, the civilians, the states, the civilians, and then he can also switch his hat to Commander-in-Chief of the military and give orders to the military to go into the state and restore the republic. Okay, that's why he is born or naturalized. That's why he's both federal, has federal experience, but he doesn't have to be in the federal government. Let's look at that. Okay, so Article 2, Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. He's the highest person over the civilian states, the civilians, the civilian governments, the republics. Then, Article 2, Section 2, the president, now wearing a different hat, shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and the Navy of the United States. Stop. Not United States of America. He's the Commander-in-Chief of the United States, of the military, and the militia of the several states when called into actual service of the United States, when called into actual service of the military, when they're called into the military. The militia, state militia called into the military, they're of the United States. They're in service to the United States. Some of the first oaths for the military was that they were going to have loyalty to all the states, the United States of America, but they were going to be in service to the United States, in service to the military. Okay? Now let's look at the president's, I don't want to get out of order too much here, the president's qualifications. Let's see. No person, okay? No person except a natural-born citizen, okay? That's a person of the United States of America, a natural-born citizen of any state. A person from any state can be president. Natural-born citizen, not citizen of the United States yet. Or a citizen of the United States. So he's either a person of one of the states, United States of America, or he's in the military. And if he's in the military, he should have 14 years resident within the United States, within the military. So let me reread this. Let me reread this in a way that clarifies. No person except a natural-born person of any state of the United States of America, or a federal person at the time of the adoption of this Constitution, which meant Washington, right? Because he qualified, shall be eligible to the office of president. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained the age of 35 years and been 14 years in service in the military. Okay, and that's exactly what it says. So who are these people that claim to be qualified as our president who have never served in the military? They're not authorized. Here we go back to the legal principles, so the lawful principles. You have to be authorized. You have to have authority, and authority has to come from the organic laws. So if Trump or Kamala, whatever her name is, or any person is serving as president who hasn't had the required 14 years military service, how in the hell can they run our military properly? How in the hell can they be president? And why should we want anybody who hasn't had the required time and service in the military? Why should we let any of those people be president and commander of our military? And a lot of people say, well, this person has so many business years experience. Well, that's because they want you to believe that business experience is better than military experience. But that doesn't qualify them for the office, for the actual constitutional office. Because without qualifying for the actual constitutional office, you can pretend to be president all you want, but you're not. You can pretend to be a congressman all you want, but you're not. You have no authority. None. No constitutional authority. And no one is bound to obey them. No one is bound to follow their laws or vote them in an election, and they don't have the authority to tell anybody what to do or make any laws for anybody. And then now we have people saying, well, the UCC and American jurisprudence and all this stuff. It doesn't matter if the people who are enforcing it or writing it have no authority to be in those positions. Okay? Doesn't matter. So we're kind of going backwards on this. We started from the 14th Amendment, we went to the 4th Amendment, or Article 4, went to Article 2, now let's go to Article 1. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the military of the United States. It's a military Congress. And the military Congress is only required to meet once a year, or if there's a disturbance, and then they have to be convened. Okay? And that's why they say, well, if the Congress can't get there, the president can send troops out. Okay, so all legislative powers herein granted under this Constitution is for a military Congress, an instated military Congress. They would be instated once a year, at least, and then they could assemble themselves for war purposes. Okay. Other than that, we don't need a military Congress up there. We know this because of the enacting clause, which I'll get to in a minute. Okay, and now we're going to go to the preamble. We the people of the United States, those of us in the military, we are forming a more perfect union, and we're going to do all these things for you. For who? Okay, for the United States of America, for the states. This is a military constitution. This is the military that the states created. The United States of America created the military for their protection, to protect justice, to ensure tranquility, the blessings of liberty. That's the military's job. That's why we have them. And we call them the United States, because there's military posts in every state. Okay, so us in the military, we people in the military, this is our promise to the states. Establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So there are people out there who know what I'm telling you, and they've written about it. And they have said, we cannot go all the way back. I believe Antonio Scalia, Judge Antonio Scalia, Napolitano, and there's a couple of other writers that have written some books, I don't recall their names, have said this. We can't go all the way back to the original Constitution because it would cripple our legal system. It would cripple us as a nation. Okay? I don't know how that's possible. I really don't. They don't explain it. They just say it. So I guess that's why they don't talk about it, because they feel like if people knew this, it would cripple us, because the Congress that we have now out there is basically businessmen. Okay, so let's talk about the enacting clause. Okay, so if you have a military called the United States, and you have the states, and the states assemble in Congress also, they would have two different enacting clauses. Okay, and they do have two different enacting clauses. So the United States of America has one enacting clause, which you can see in the Articles of Confederation, which were never repealed or replaced. It can't be repealed or replaced because the Articles of Confederation created the federal government, created the military. So now we're back to our principles, our legal principles, our lawful principles that we have to follow in order to make sure that our organic laws are done properly. If they're not done properly, it falls apart. And they were done properly. So if you look at the Articles of Confederation, you see the enacting clause right there. It says, being enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America. Now this is a book for rules and articles of war, etc. An act for establishing rules and articles for the government of the armies of the United States. So the government of the armies is the United States. But who can make those laws? It's got to be the higher power, right? The military can only do what they're told to do by the states, what they're allowed to do by the states. In reality, lawfully, by principle, by proper authority, by the organic laws, the military has to do what they're told. And their boss is the United States of America. Okay, so the United States of America are the states. So the states tell the military what to do. The rules and articles of war, okay, so the enacting clause is used by every person who has proper authority. And you have to look at the proper authority and decide, is that actual proper authority or not? So if I just come to say, so I'm Jen, the Liberty Lion, and I come from over here, and this is my authority, and you have to do what I say. You're gonna look at me and say, screw you, I don't know you, I don't know what that is. Go over there and deceive those people. So you look at the proper authority and you make sure that the authority they claim to have is the authority that they actually have. So be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America. This is when the states convene, not the United States. The states convene, and they convene, I guess under the Articles of Confederation. There's not really a list of rules that they have to follow in the Articles of Confederation, but they cannot convene under the Constitution because the Constitution's not for the states, it's for the military, the federal Constitution of the United States. So it says that from and after the passing of this act, the following shall be the rules and articles by which the armies of the United States shall be governed. Okay, so the United States of America is supposed to pass the laws for the United States. And you might say, well, isn't that why we have a constitution? They already know what they're supposed to do. Well, the Constitution says what they can do on the federal lands, but there's little things that have to be expanded on. So for example, if you join the Navy, you're in the Navy. If you join the Army, you're in the Army. If you join the Air Force, you're in the Air Force. If you join the Marines, you're in the Marines. If you join the Coast Guard, you're in the Coast Guard. And they were never allowed to switch services. Like, if I'm in the Navy, I can't also be in the Army. If I'm in the Army, I cannot also be in the Marine Corps. So what they did was that for certain purposes, for certain times, such as being short-staffed, they had to write a law that allowed the military to switch people around. Okay, so the United States of America had to write a law saying the military could do this thing. They could switch people around. So if the Army is short-handed on radio men, and the Navy has excess of radio men, they could take some of the Navy people and put them under the Army. Okay? So that's the reason why the states have to convene. They convene to do certain things, to write certain acts, laws, whatever, so that the Army can function properly. In my opinion, when the states convene, it was never to make laws for the people of the states. That's why we have a state legislature. And they were never supposed to pass laws saying, well, we got to regulate commerce and we got to this and we got to that. That's why we have a military. The military doesn't regulate commerce. It just makes sure that one state doesn't stop another state's commerce from flowing. Lincoln took over the railroads. He used the military to take over the railroads back in the Civil War. So this would be, it was kind of beyond really the power that I think the Constitution was intended to have, because he then let Rockefeller use the rail lines to ship his products. And so because he didn't have to pay for the shipping of the products, he made a whole lot of money, and from there he built up Standard Oil, and then he started a trust with Friedrich Gates, and Friedrich Gates married, one of his children married Nelson Rockefeller, and then we ended up with Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation and all this, junk that we have now. But that was an abuse of power by Lincoln, taking over the rail lines, not to ensure the flow, but to then hand it over for one person to use and make a profit. Okay, so if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them in the best way that I can. This video was really made in reference to the idea of national citizenship. I don't believe there's such a thing unless you are working for all the states, which would be the military, but you're in service to the military, but you're loyal to all the states. And that, like I said, is part of the first oaths that were taken by the military, is that they're loyal to the United States of America, all the states, but they're in service to the military, the United States. And so those people would have a national citizenship because they need to travel all over without being stopped. Now, that could be expanded, maybe properly, maybe improperly, over the years to accommodate, other things, other issues that arise and need to be taken care of. But originally, a national citizen was someone who was loyal to all the states and in service to the military and would protect all the states no matter what. And they would be a citizen of the state they were in, and they would be a citizen of the federal government because they're required to take orders from the federal government, but they're still required to follow the laws of the state when they go off federal lands. They just couldn't be stopped. And national citizenship may also include representatives who go overseas to foreign countries, representing America as a military person to negotiate peace treaties and stuff. So that's my take on it all. I guarantee you 100% every military post follows the Constitution the way it's supposed to be followed, not the way we look at it, a civilian's off military post. So for me, I was in a unique position because I was a regulatory enforcement specialist, and I knew that the federal laws applied to the federal people on the federal lands. I knew that the state laws applied to the federal people on the federal lands. But when I went off the federal lands, I was no longer required to follow federal laws. I still had to follow all the state laws, not just the ones that applied to the federal government. When I was in the military, I took an oath. I did the verbal oath. I signed the contract. I got the paperwork. I became a federal citizen, and a resident on the federal lands because that's where I lived. I was a resident because I didn't own any land on the federal lands. Okay, so I was a resident. I was temporary. Just like you're a resident, you're the hospital doctor resident. You're temporary. You're not there permanently. Yeah, that's it. I don't believe that there's a national citizenship for people who are not in the military. At least that's not what was intended. So if you look at the Alien and Nationality Act, it's not been passed into positive law, which means it doesn't comply with the section of the Constitution that requires all laws passed by the military be constitutional. Okay, so that must have been passed by the United States of America, and that's not to say that it's not law, but it's not law under the Constitution, so it's not a constitutional law. Okay, so again, if you have any questions, feel free to post in the comment section, and I'll try to answer the best I can. I can't promise that I know the answer to every question. If you want some more examples of something I talked about in here, post that and give me a thumbs up. I also wanted to say something real quick that I watch Gregory Mannarino, and he has a YouTube channel where he talks about the stock market and making money on the system and stuff like that. And I have posted comments in his videos quite often where I tell him, hey, you know, you were in the military, don't you know this? And look at my channel and help me promote my channel. And he's never come right out and mentioned me, but he was a doctor in the Navy, and he does come out and say to the effect that you don't really understand things sometimes until after the fact, and then you look back. So when I was in the military, didn't really understand a whole lot about the Constitution. Didn't even read it really. Didn't understand the oath and what it meant, and why you do a verbal oath, why you sign an oath, why you sign a contract, and then you perform the act, why you have to be of a certain age, and all these other things. Just like marriage, you have to meet someone, you have to converse with them, you have to agree that you want to spend your lives with each other. You have to go in front of a witness and a minister. You have to say, I do, I do. You have to, I don't guess you always have to exchange something, but then you have to go and you have to consummate the marriage, so you have to do the work. So there's a process to everything, and when you become a federal citizen, there's a process to it. And that process includes the oath and all these other things that I mentioned, signing the contract, becoming federal property, and then going onto the federal lands, becoming a resident, and being owned by the federal government. No person in the military can own property, land, okay, or a house on federal lands. There are some instances where private people own property inside federal lands, and that's something else I've talked about in other videos. So I don't want to keep going on and on with this video. It's been a while and it's hot out here. So with that, I bid you farewell, and I'll see you in the next